Prašau, Jurgita.
Norėjau paklausti gerbiamą teisėją Šimonį. Kaip suderinti teisėjų nepriklausomumo ir teisininkų visuomenės atvirumo bendradarbiavimo principus, kuriuos jūs minėjot savo pranešime, tame tarpe bendradarbiavimo ir su visuomenė? Ir kaip neteoriškai nubrėžti ribą, kur yra atvirumas, diskusija, o kur jau yra teisėjo nepriklausomumo principo pažeidimas. Ir klausimas, ar tie atskirimo kriterijai šitų dalykų turėtų būti kažkur tai aiškiai apibrėžti, ar vis dėlto taip ir likti tik mūsų tam tikros moralinės nuojautos dalykų, mūsų pajautimo dalykų, kur ta riba yra.
Ačiū, labai geras klausimas. Čia mes prieš pusę metų, tengi dėstytoja yra taip pat ir advokatė, prieš pusę metų mes pradėjom diskusiją teisme apie tai, kiek teisėjai gali dalyvauti bendraujant su advokatais. Tai tame tarpe ir atvira, kad ta diskusija būtų. Tai, principas buvo toks, kad siekiant nepažeisti nepriklausomumo ar išlaikyti nešališkumo įvaizdį, tas bendravimas, atvirumas teisėjo ir visuomenės, tame tarp teisininkų visuomenės yra ribotas laike, vietoje, situacijoje. Ir jeigu mes laiko, vietos ir situacijos nesuvoksime, tai tada be abejo tos atvirumo ribos yra mažesnės. Bet jeigu mes suvoksime, kaip mes turime būti atviri, kaip mes turim komunikuoti, tai tos atvirumo ribos yra platesnės turėtų būti. Lygiai taip pat, kaip aš pateikiau pavyzdį, kad chirurgas eidamas į operaciją, jisai, kad ir būdamas koks profesionalus chirurgas, jisai negali eiti tenai su nesteriliais instrumentais. Tai lygiai taip pat ir teisėjas. Ir jeigu jis eina su nesteriliais instrumentais, jam geriau į tą operaciją neiti iš vis. Lygiai taip pat ir teisėjas, jeigu jisai nežino, kaip bendrauti atvirai su visuomenė, tai geriau tada mažiau bendrauti. Taigi ta riba yra būtent išlaikymas to nešališkumo, neutralumo, objektyvaus stebėtojo akimis. Ir jeigu tas išlaikomi tie principai, tai tie vartai atvirumo yra daug platesni. Jeigu neišlaikomi, be abejo, jie tada turi būti ribojami etikos kodekso, kuris šiandien dieną yra labai platus ir be abejo galbūt kai kur per platus, bet kai kur galbūt ir per mažai detalizuotas. Tai normatyvizacijoje visą laiką yra galimybė, nes teisės ir ypatingai etikos normos yra daug suvokiamos ne tik tai racionaliai, bet ir tam tikrais pojūčiais, tam tikrais supratimais. Tai jeigu praktika padiktuos tam tikrą poreikį detalizuoti, o jinai ir diktuoja šiandien dienai detalizuoti etikos normas, tai manau, kad etikos kodeksas turės būti keičiamas, pildomas. Ar atsakiau?
Ačiū.
Ačiū.
Mes turime dar 2 klausimus iš auditorijos paskutinius, tai prašom pirmiausia, first you please.
Thanks. Just 2-3 small issues for clarification. Just 2-3 small issues for clarification. The first question to Professor Bergmanas regarding Article 2 of the Lithuanian Constitution, where it said that sovereignty shall belong to the nation. For me, it doesn't really seem to define where sovereignty comes from. Is there anything in jurisprudence, for example, in the context of Lithuania's role in European integration, which clarifies this norm a little bit more? And the second question to Chief Justice Šimonis, you quoted the Lithuanian Constitutional Court to the effect that independent judges are a key element of a democratic state. Doesn't this confuse democracy with the rule of law? And does the Lithuanian Constitution provide a differentiation between these two principles, democracy on one hand, rule of law on the other hand? And finally, regarding to the quote you had on slide 11, may I ask from which case of the European Court of Human Rights that was? Was it also Huvisaari versus Finland, or another one? Thanks.
Actually, I don't understand it as a question. Could you restate it?
Yes. Article 2 of the Lithuanian Constitution only says that sovereignty shall belong to the nation.
Yes.
It doesn't explain where sovereignty comes from. One would expect that in a democratic nation, sovereignty comes from the people, from the nation, however you want to call it. Is there any clarification with regard to this norm, for example, in the context of European integration? If sovereignty shall belong to the nation, can it be transferred, for example, to the EU? Would that be a barrier to further integration?
Well, that is a well specific question, but still, how to say that the concept belongs. At least I think it presumes that it speaks about origination of sovereignty, and we can understand it like that. And what concerns it can pose problems to somehow to transfer of sovereignty to other institutions or to broader supranational level, so to say. Of course, I think it may pose problems, and in some sense it poses a problem, and it is then a matter of interpretation how to solve it problem, and interpretation actually should be done essentially by courts.
Please.
Aš atsakysiu lietuviškai, nes taip galbūt bus tiksliau pavyks išreikšti mintį. Suprantu, kad klausimas buvo, ar Konstitucinio teismo oficialioji doktrina, nubrėžianti, kad teismų nepriklausomumas vienas iš esminių demokratinės teisinės valstybės principų, ko pasireiškia demokratizacija šio principo įgyvendinime. Tai akivaizdu, jog visų pirma, tai yra valdžių padalinimo principo įgyvendinimas. Jeigu teismas bus nepriklausomas, bus įgyvendinta valdžių padalinimo principas, atskirimas įstatymų leidžiamosios, vykdomosios ir teisminės valdžios. Todėl ir demokratinės valstybės paremtos tam tikrų svarsčių ir atsvarų sistema būtent reikalauja šio principo užtikrinimo. Todėl, matyt, ir Konstitucinio teismo teisėjai, sunku būtų aiškinti Konstitucinio teismo nutarimą, tai galėtų atlikti daugiau čia dalyvaujantis Konstitucinio teismo teisėjas, rėmėsi būtent šią ištaką demokratinės valstybės. O dėl antros dalies klausimo, tai taip yra konkreti byla, yra pas mane skaidrėse kitose, kurios yra detalesnės. Tiesiog, kadangi pranešimas neturėjo kažkokio reikalavimų formatui, ta byla nėra pacituota, tačiau aš galėsiu tos bylos duomenys perduoti iš karto po konferencijos. Ačiū.
Okay. So please, Professor.
Sorry for not introducing me last time. I flooded my neighbor instead. My name is Roman Puff from the University of Salzburg. I have
He just watered down my argument.
I have one question to Philip Langbroek and a brief remark to Thomas Beckmanner's talk. Philip first. You told us that there is no tangible impact of financial and managerial structures of the courts on the judgments. So I wonder why they were introduced. Pleasing managers? I don't know. And would you perhaps... I see that in our society, that for decades they start introducing managerial structures that come from how to lead a company into fields where common goods are produced, like justice or, say, medical care or whatever. I don't know, isn't that perhaps some sort of an evidence that that in the production, that the production of public goods exceeds managerial concepts as they are taught in business schools? That would be my question to you, and my remark to Thomas. I'm very sorry that Professor, and I'll try to pronounce it, Alexandravicius isn't here any longer. Perhaps what you suggested about the implementation of relational concepts of sovereignty and law would have helped his problem, but I'm not really sure whether he would have liked the result. I don't know what you think about it. Thank you.
Roman, thank you very much for this question. So let me clarify. So the second part of your question comes last, because that's the best part of your question. But on your first question, why did they introduce this system? I can give you a very plain answer. Before this system of financing of the course was installed, each court, the system was absolutely not transparent at all. So then a court president would have some problems with personnel, not enough personnel, or not enough computers, or whatever. They had to go to The Hague and talk with the responsible civil servant and ask for some more money. And then the civil servant, his name was Dieteren, could do something about it. But the only person in the country who had an overview of what was going on financially in the court was Mr. Dieteren. And so the presidents amongst themselves said, I'm going to Dieteren, as a verb, you say, to ask for more money to have some problem solved. And when the judiciary at the end of the 90s decided that they wanted to get organized, they said, well, we need a system in which we can have a fair distribution of the budget for the courts over the courts. And so they developed a measurement system of court production.
But it were the judges themselves.
The judges, they were helped by economists, but they themselves were heavily involved. So that's why it's been introduced, and that's why it works quite well. Then the second part of your question, it was never the intention of this system that it would steer, let's say, the productivity or the of the judges. It is intended as a tool to distribute the money amongst the courts. And therefore I can confirm, yes, especially if it comes to the work of courts and judges, the public good produced is priceless. But still, there are some costs, and we have to, you need a budget legislation, and the money has to be distributed, and you need a system for the distribution of the money, even although public goods sometimes are priceless.
Well, I can also a little bit reply. Of course, my presentation was in some sense in resonance to what Alexandravicius said, and I completely agree with you whether he would be happy about the outcomes of the implementation of this conception. But how to say, still I think that the solution of such a problems, I think, lies at the deeper philosophical layers, so to say, and we have to make analysis here and essentially into human condition. And I think that we all here in this region still need good lessons of actually Scandinavian realism. And what was made in that school, and this just simple showing that that many legal concepts, they have no so-called semantic reference in the real world. This materialization of law, this, as I say, thingification in the field of law in itself is a problem. And when we speak that law or sovereignty can belong to someone, it's poetics, it's metaphoric. And we have to somehow try to live without it. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. To Philip, I can't say anything before I see the data. So, but it was really good presentation. Thomas, I start from where you ended. So let's see. Mr. Simonis, I was interested about your idea of communication in a way, also as an advocate, attorneys with the judges and so on. And now I'm asking, what do you think about the idea that we should really, instead of really thinking about this institutional kind of auto thing, what is going on within institutions, so we should take the individual perspective and think more how lawyers and attorneys communicate with the person, and how the judges communicate with the person who is there, because that is exactly the most important thing, I think. Thinking about motivations, thinking about, I had this theory of when we had in Finland discussion about the head of the Attorneys Association said that attorneys should have some kind of psychological courses and whatever. I think it's very simple. I mean, your attorney's first enemy is his own client. And, you have to find out whether he's really serious, whether he thinks his rights have been breached, because there are like millions of people who, you know what happens in the real court. Everybody claims that they have a right to sovereignty or whatever, and it's a mess. So just to think about this communication from the perspective of individuals towards attorneys and judges, rather than thinking the auto communication within the institution, thinking about ethics, what is going on there.
As I understand, it was reaction or question.
It was just argument.
Okay. I have two last reactions or questions. One of them is Judge of Constitutional Court and yours, okay?
Norėčiau klausimą užduoti mano kolegai Mindaugui Šimoniui. Tiesiog labai patiko pranešimas ir ta aliuzija su steriliais, instrumentais. Tai ta sterilių instrumentų temą noriu pavystyti ir užduoti klausimą. Visi žinom, kaip apkrauti yra teisėjai apylinkės, apygardos teismuose, kiek bylų pas juos guli kabinetuose ir koks darbo krūvis. Tai vat klausimas toks būtų, ar tas didelis darbo krūvis, tas bylų kiekis, ar tai nėra įimas operuoti su instrumentais, tais.
Čia ko gero tos sąlygos ligoniniai, kurias sudaro ligoninės administracija. Tačiau bet kokiu atveju šiandieninę situaciją dėl darbo krūvio galima vertinti objektyviai, galima subjektyviai iš tam tikrų darbuotojo ir darbdavio santykio prizmių. Tai jeigu vertint objektyviai, tai kaip aš šiandien matau situaciją, tai darbo krūviai yra, turint įsteigtą ir pakankamai efektyviai veikiantį teisėjų padėjėjų institutą, darbo krūviai yra, galbūt taip galim sakyti, išvežami, kaip mėšlai iš tvarto. Išvežami. Bet jeigu žiūrint kūrybinę prasme, taip kaip teisėjas turėtų iš tikrųjų kokiam sąlygom gyventi ir spręsti, tai iš tikrųjų darbo krūviai yra jau pasiekia tam tikras ribas. Tačiau bet kokiu atveju aš manau, kad darbo krūvio kiekis negali pateisinti tam tikrų elementarių standartų, kurie būtini privalomi laikytis mūsų profesinėje veikloje. Jeigu nebepaveži, tai tada ir nebeveži. Na, kol veži, tol veži. Aš manau, šiandieninė situacija iš tikrųjų finansinė krizė, kaip tai nuslūgus, šiek tiek stebimas darbo krūvio sumažėjimas civilinė. Tai be abejo, aš galbūt kalbu daugiau iš administratoriaus pusės, dalyvauja, žinau, kolegos, gali būti ir turėti savo nuomonę apie tai. Čia kaip darbdavys darbuotojų, nors nesu ir darbdavys ir pats esu darbuotojas toj pačioj įstaigoje, kadangi lygiai taip pat vežu kaip teisėjas. Manau, viskas yra įveikiama, jeigu yra gera valia ir yra motivacija. O šiandien, ką mes turim sistemoje problemą, iš tikrųjų problemą mes turim su teisėjų motivacija. Tai taip, galbūt ir pabaigčiau.
Yes, Professor Philip.
Okay. Thank you. I was just triggered by the discussion about communication between the judges and their audiences. So, judges have different audiences. They have the parties, they have the advocates, and they have the wider public, and maybe also politicians to a certain extent are audiences of judges. Now the question is how the judges should communicate, because the essence of judicial activity is to make a decision and to justify the decision in writing. We all know that people who have no training in law have great difficulties in reading most of the judgments. So, from a communication perspective, the judgments are not very effective. Then, are there any alternatives? In the courtroom there are, because a judge can explain the outcomes to the parties in ordinary language. And for example, in family cases, cases about tutelage, for example, it's not so difficult. In other cases, it may be much more complicated. And then the question is, who should provide for that information in such a form that non-lawyers understand what it's about? If you keep it within the legal domain, nothing is going to change. But then you come up with questions. Could the judge themselves, for example, issue a press message in order to explain the outcome to the wider audience? Or should they be helped by a journalist or whatever? Or should the court engage in other activities in order to explain what they do and what the outcomes of the decision during the last year has been? And yet another issue, in order, for example, to make also the legal debate a little bit more attractive to the wider public, and that's of course especially an issue in civil law countries, is could judges dissent in public about cases with their colleagues? And if you would have these types of debate, it would increase the livelihood of the application of the law in the courts, but maybe it would jeopardize judicial authority. But in Anglo-Saxon countries, they don't make a lot of fuss about it. But in France and in the Netherlands and in Belgium and in Germany, you know, it ought not to be done. But it's really a very difficult problem to solve.
Aš tikrai dėkoju visai auditorijai už kantrumą, bet mes turim dar vieną klausimą, todėl prašom, please, Professor.
Just in order to tackle the problem that Philip has spoken about, in my country we have a habit that in very complicated or publicly important cases, the court issue an abridgment, an executive abridgment. The problem is, for example, that it's not always understood, and sometimes it even makes the judgment itself unclear. For example, we had a case of our Prime Minister, our previous Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, was convicted of one account of bribery, and he was acquitted for other two. The media, which published only the executive abridgment, didn't understand it, and they say that he was acquitted. And even now, 2 months after the decision, a big part of our population thinks that he was acquitted. So it's also a problem.
Okay, all other questions after afternoon, after lunch. Ačiū visai nuostabiai auditorijai, labai kantriai. Mes laukiam visų vėlgi po pietų.